thought it might be good to do a little LSAT and admissions 101 for those of you who are just starting to think about law school, starting to consider it, and maybe haven't dipped your toes in the water yet. So I'll start by laying out a bit of what the LSAT looks like, and then we'll talk a little bit about what the admissions process as a whole looks like. And then, of course, if you have any questions, please reach out and I'll do a future episode covering whatever I failed to include this time. So the LSAT has three different types of sections. It has logic games, which are puzzles, also known as analytical reasoning. There's logical reasoning, which are short arguments. And then you have reading comprehension, which are passages followed by questions. The logic games section is typically the most feared and most intimidating aspect of the exam because at first glance, it appears to look nothing like what you might be previously familiar with if you're a humanities person. They are logic puzzles. You are given sets of variables to manipulate, and they're testing to see whether you can make inferences or connections between the different elements. There are rules governing them. There are 4 puzzles per section of logic games, and they are typically called games. Typically, you'll be asked to put things in order, or you'll be asked to group things, or a combination of either. Then logical reasoning, like I said, short arguments. There are about 25 questions in the logical reasoning section, maybe 26 sometimes, and they are asking you to do things or identify things related to arguments. They might ask you to strengthen or weaken an argument. They might ask you to identify the method of reasoning used within an argument. They might ask you to simply tell them what else must be true on the basis of a particular set of facts or a particular argument. So lots of fun there. There are about 15 different things they may ask you to do related to an argument they're presenting you with. And so, of course, familiarity is the name of the game. Then finally, the reading comprehension section. You're given 3 long passages and 2 short passages, and you're asked to infer things about those passages. They might ask you what the main point or main idea of a passage is. They might ask you the purpose of a passage. They might ask you how the passage is organized, or they might ask you various details about the passages. The passages are typically on humanities, social sciences, natural sciences, and law. And no prior knowledge, no prior familiarity is required on the topics they're including. And you want to be careful not to focus on the details of the passages, but rather the argumentative structure of the passages, how the author goes about making their argument. And so while this section may be seem similar to SAT or ACT reading comprehension at first, it's actually quite different. Now, each of the sections on the LSAT is 35 minutes. You have 35 minutes to complete each section, and each section contains anywhere from 23 to 27 questions. The LSAT as a whole will contain around 100 questions, maybe 101, maybe 99. And those are, of course, the 4 scored sections. Then there is also a 5th section that is the experimental section. So you've got the 1 games section, 1 reading comprehension section, and 2 logical reasoning sections. So the logical reasoning with the short arguments, that'll take up half of the scored exam. Then you're also required to complete an experimental section, which is any of games, logical reasoning, or reading comprehension, and they don't give you any advance notice at all. So which one it's going to be. So you have to take it seriously. They're not going to tell you in advance. You have to take it as if it's the real thing because it very well might be the real one. So you have the 5 sections. You're given 3 sections back to back. Then you get a short break of maybe 10 minutes. Then you get another 2 sections back to back. Then you have the writing sample. The writing sample is not scored. Law schools often don't look at it. They don't really care about it. And March will be the last time you're actually doing it on test day. Starting in June, you won't be doing it at the test center. You'll be doing it from the comfort of your own home on your own computer, and they'll monitor you with a webcam and a microphone to make sure it's really you doing it. Previously, test takers have had to do it by hand, written out on test day, and if you retake the LSAT, you're redoing the writing sample with another unique prompt. Starting in June, that's no longer the case. But writing sample is not really that But the writing sample really isn't worth focusing too much on. For the LSAT, there's not really a particular class in college I'd recommend taking to help you prepare for it. Any formal logic or philosophy class will go way beyond what you need to know for the LSAT. I could probably show you all the formal logic you need in a half hour, and that would cover it and save your GPA, because if you're anything like me or you're a typical humanities major, formal logic and anything mathematical or symbolic is not your thing by nature, and it could potentially harm your GPA. So definitely not worth it. If you're starting early in the process, you want to do some prior reading to familiarize yourself with LSAT style thinking. I'd recommend the book A Rule Book for Arguments by Anthony Weston. It's very short and concise, kind of like The Elements of Style by Strunk and White, but for logic. Sometimes reading things like the Scientific American or The Economist can help you gain some familiarity with dense text and the kinds of topics that are typically featured on the LSAT itself. But again, that's not required, and that's not a substitute for studying. The best prep of all are actual LSAT exams. They're called prep tests, and you can get them, most of them, in books of 10 for about $20 each on Amazon. There are currently 86 numbered LSATs and then several that are unnumbered, so you have nearly 100 exams at your disposal to practice on, and there's not really any reason to go outside of that. There's not really much reason, if any, to use fake LSAT questions, if not only to spot the mistakes contained within them. So make sure your books are using real LSAT questions. Most books these days do, but best of all is just getting the exams directly from LSAC on Amazon. They're published in books of actual official LSAT prep tests. As for a study timeline, I recommend studying for at least 3 to 6 months to reach your maximum potential. A lot of traditional in-person classes are only 2 to 3 months, but that's not because that's what you need. That's because that's what is economically feasible for test prep companies to offer, and most students don't want to spend longer than that preparing for the LSAT, but it really is worth it. It's weighted more heavily than your GPA in the admissions process, and so think about it. You're investing 4 years of your life to determine your GPA, and the LSAT is weighted more heavily than that, so why would you spend only 2 months on it? I'd say the people who do the best typically spend at least 5 or 6 months, if not a year. And that might sound crazy, especially when you think about what you may have invested in your SAT prep, or if you've taken the GMAT or the GRE, those are easier and don't require as much prep. But the LSAT is kind of like learning a foreign language. And you'll see once you get into it just how deep the rabbit hole goes on this. I mean, I got into this back in 2005 and I haven't stopped studying it and learning from it. I'm always learning more even to this day. And so studying the vast majority of the exams is beneficial. It's not necessary, but I'd say you at least want to do the most recent couple dozen. It is worth investing that amount of time in it, and I'd say you want to do at least 10 full-length timed exams before test day in realistic test day-like conditions. Now, the admissions process is a whole nother thing, though. We have the LSAT score, the biggest factor in admissions, maybe that determines 40 or 50% of your chances. Then you have your GPA, which is maybe 20 to 30% of your chances. And then you have the other soft factors in your application, like the personal statement, letters of recommendation, diversity statement, resume. All of those play some role, but not that large a role, maybe 10 or 20% of your admissions chances as a whole. Every school has its own unique admissions index where it's basically a formula where they're taking your LSAT score and your GPA and then calculating how you stack up against other applicants and against previous matriculating classes, admitted students who chose to go to that school. And they do this because of the rankings. The rankings are the US News rankings, and they are considered far too heavily by everybody. Everyone looks at them very carefully. And a lot of law school admission officers' careers are actually built upon how their schools do in the rankings. If you're an admission officer and your school drops too much in the rankings, you might be out of a job. It's crazy, but that's just how the game is played. Law schools care about raising their own space in the rankings They want to improve their ranking, and they do that by admitting students with the highest possible LSAT scores and GPAs. And so your GPA may already be quite heavily fixed by this point, but your LSAT score is not. And so if it's not where you want it to be, then you may want to consider retaking. And of course, retaking may not be ideal. It may not be what you want to do, but it's worth it, because if you can raise your LSAT score even by another point or two, that could lead to thousands of dollars more in scholarship money or getting into a better law school. So the ROI on the time invested in your retake is huge. It's well worth it if you can carve out the time. And law schools don't average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest. And so there really isn't any reason not to retake if you have the time. You might be concerned about applying later in the cycle, but applying early matters much less than it used to. Law school admissions is conducted on a rolling basis, meaning that you can apply anytime and get your results back whenever law schools feel like that, getting them back to you, letting you know how it turned out. But law schools are waitlisting and deferring more and more applicants than ever before because they want to see who else is going to come in. And of course, that's not ideal for you because you're sitting around waiting for months, but that's just, once again, how the game is played. If you're applying anytime after January, it might be to your advantage to wait another cycle and apply the following fall, because there will be less scholarship money available to applicants and there may be fewer seats available, of course. And so if you care about things like scholarship money or getting into the best law school possible, then it's worth waiting. If, on the other hand, time is of the essence and you really just need to start law school ASAP for some reason, then of course apply whenever you want. But it's really worth waiting, in my opinion, because although it might seem like waiting one more year is the end of the world, it's really not much time in the grand scheme of things. If you look at your entire career, let's say you're 24 or 25 right now, you've got another 40 years ahead of you in your career. And so if you think about avoiding tens of thousands of dollars in law school debt or getting into a better law school, what could your career look like, or what could your life look like without that debt hanging over you, or the new career opportunities that could open up to you as a result? And so I would strongly encourage you to go to the best law school possible and avoid law school debt. It's actually possible for you to go to law school completely for free if your LSAT score and GPA are good enough. I work with a lot of students who end up getting full rides or at least tens of thousands of dollars in scholarship money. And so the ROI on any time you invest in your retake could pay off big. Anyway, I hope you found this helpful. Please feel free to reach out if you need anything at all. I'm happy to help however I can. You can email me directly at lsatunplugged@gmail.com. I can't respond to every email I receive, but I do read every single one, and your ideas and feedback help give me ideas for future episodes. So please do feel free to reach out. And in the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.